we understand that like real-time capabilities are extremely important to prevent breaches, stop breaches, and remediate them. So we have two core capabilities that I think are different from the others. One, we use LLMs to improve the visibility and posture capabilities that you have compared to your standard IGA and PAM tools today. But then two, we are able to do real-time detection and response to identity-based threats. And this makes it so that you're able to catch anything that your identity like governance program might have missed, or anybody that gets phished, stolen credentials, stolen tokens, and so on. The ability to do it real time is something that we think is lacking in the industry.
This is Identity at the Center. If it has anything to do with IAM, this is the go-to podcast. Now your hosts, Jim McDonald and Jeff Stedman.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. How are you?
Oh, not so bad. Yourself?
Good. I'm excited for today's episode. I think the focus for me is innovation. I talk to a lot of folks who are listeners of the show. They want to know what are the new innovations that are happening, what are the new products that are bringing innovation into the world of IAM. So we're going to get into that today.
Yeah, for sure. Today's a sponsored episode, so making that very clear up front. These are episodes where we dive a little bit deeper into the technologies and the players in the space, and there are a lot of them, so I'm glad that we're able to get some of these folks on and kind of explain, okay, where are they coming from, their viewpoints and things like that. So just make it crystal clear, right? This is a sponsored episode. And today, we're sponsored by SlashID. They're an identity platform to protect human and non-human identities. You can find out more about them at slashid.com. /IDAC. And we've got Vincenzo Iozzo today. He's the CEO at SlashID. Welcome, Vincenzo. And hopefully I didn't butcher your last name.
You didn't. I'm very impressed.
All right. Well, we're starting off on a great note. One of the things that we always like to do before we start to get into any sort of conversation is really find out about the backgrounds of the people that we talk to that are in the identity space. It's a wide and varied space. You've got an interesting one. So let's start there. How did you get into the digital identity space? Is it something that you chose or did it choose you?
It definitely chose me. So I have a bit of a strange background compared to a lot of like your guests in that I started my career in sort of like the offensive security side of things, and then over time got closer and closer to identity. So my original background is in security research. I used to work on vulnerabilities and exploits for endpoints. Fast forward, I spent a number of years at CrowdStrike, and one of the products that I was involved with at CrowdStrike was the identity protection product. And that's how I started to be involved in the identity space. But it's always has been more from a security standpoint rather than a traditional identity background.
And so you take that attack mindset, no better way to start with like, all right, how do we defend against attackers? And you also do some work, I think, with Black Hat, right? As I was kind of stalking you on LinkedIn a little bit. Tell me about your Black Hat involvement.
Yeah. So, when I started back in the days on the security kind of like researcher track, I used to do a lot of like presentations on attacks and like exploitation techniques. And that's how I got involved with Black Hat at the beginning. And then I've stayed involved throughout the years to give back to the community and make sure that like we still have like vibrant talks and interesting tracks at the conference.
So I've been to Black Hat in the past. It's been a couple of years. I always kind of enjoyed it. And I've seen some interesting things there. Maybe if we have time towards the end, I'll ask you like, what are some things maybe that you've seen that might be kind of interesting there? But let's talk about SlashID. So what is SlashID? I guess tell us a little bit about the organization that you're building there and the technology that you're bringing to the digital identity market.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, we come to the space from a security background, and what we thought was missing when we started the company were really two things. One, everyone we spoke with had problems with IGA processes in the sense that they weren't particularly effective. You had a lot of failed implementations and so on. But more importantly, we had started to see most breaches at CrowdStrike being identity related, where at least either the initial vector or at some point throughout the kill chain, you had an identity component, and none of the existing products were focused on identity security rather than compliance and management.
So tell me about the name, because SlashID is kind of unique, and like there's usually a story behind something. How did you come up with SlashID?
Yeah, so what we wanted to convey with the name is similar to I don't know if you've ever read the history of Stripe, but their first name was /payment, and the idea there was to bring kind of like payments to developers and engineers. And what we wanted to do from day one is to build a platform that was friendly to security engineers and practitioners, not just sort of like a ClickOps kind of product.
So I have to say, right, there's a ton of products in this space of digital identity, too many almost to keep up with. And so there's a lot of competition. I'm curious from your perspective, what is it that you think sets SlashID apart from your contemporaries? I guess the blunt version is, what makes you special?
Yeah. So I think it's really two things. One is a lot of the other companies in the space focus on a static view of the identity, whereas coming from a security background, we understand that like real-time capabilities are extremely important to prevent breaches, stop breaches, and remediate them. So we have two core capabilities that I think are different from the others. One, we use LLMs to improve the visibility and posture capabilities that you have compared to your standard IGA and PAM tools today. But then two, we are able to do real-time detection and response to identity-based threats. And this makes it so that you're able to catch anything that your identity like governance program might have missed, or anybody that gets phished, stolen credentials, stolen tokens, and so on. The ability to do it real time is something that we think is lacking in the industry.
So Vincenzo, the question I was going to ask you was, because most of the time when I talk to entrepreneurs in this space, there's something that they recognize in the industry that's kind of overlooked, or that they feel they could bring a fresh solution to fix a problem. The question I was going to ask you is, what drew you in? But I think you answered that when you talked to Jeff about, the IGA situation not really solving the problem. I think you talked about the breaches being mostly identity related. So I want to pick on those two areas. And I've heard it said that, the IGA solutions are better for driving compliance than solving real security issues. So first, is that something you agree with? And then why is that the case, in your opinion?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, when you look at the history of IGA, and I think you had guests on the podcast that were sort of like the creators of IGA as a space, it was primarily been driven by compliance needs in the wake of Enron and similar like fraudulent activities for public companies. So the approach you take when you use governance is a very prescriptive, policy-based approach that doesn't really work when you deal with attacks that are dynamic in nature. And what attackers really try to do is to look for gaps in your posture. And it's something that a governance platform is not actually able to react to in a timely manner.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I kind of feel like this isn't a black and white situation, right? I think most of the compliance regulations try to drive better security through compliance, through kind of these governance processes. So they at least incrementally make security better. You're going in and checking to make sure people have only the access that they should have. But it seems like most of the processes from a governance perspective are detective, and they could be, not performed until some periodic basis, right? Maybe it's once a year. So checking a list of accounts and making sure that they have the right entitlements once a year is good, but not great.
Exactly. I think you're spot on, Jim. Like when you look at a problem, is an attacker breaks into an environment at any point in time, right? They don't wait for the compliance audit to come due. And what you see in complex organizations is that these entitlements change by the day. And so taking a snapshot once a year or once a quarter is nowhere near enough to be able to detect an attack in real time. On top of it, and I'm sure you've seen this as well, a lot of IGA has become so complex. There's often just a checkbox exercise where some manager just says, yes, this person on my team should have access to this system, but they don't have the ability to really know how RBAC works in that system, what entitlements really mean, and so on. So you have this double whammy where snapshot-based solutions are not moving fast enough compared to attackers. And on the flip side, the complexity of these systems is such that even when you do take a snapshot to make sure that you're compliant, often the degree of access control that you can really do is a lot less than what you need for proper security, because it's too complicated to understand the authorization model of each individual application that you're dealing with.
Yeah, I mean, as you're talking, I'm sitting here thinking of one of the biggest faux pas within kind of the idea of governance, which is rubber stamping. I mean, I think what happens in organizations is there's two major problems. One is the entitlement system is so complex that people don't really understand that Vincenzo has XYZ access. Is that appropriate? Well, if you put that in front of the wrong person or somebody who doesn't know what XYZ access really means, they say, well, Vincenzo's a good guy. He wouldn't do anything wrong. And so they just say, keep it. Or they're afraid that if they take it off, the company's going to stop being able to pay invoices or something crazy, right? So there's the not having enough information around entitlements. So the other thing that I find you don't hear talked about much is that a lot of the decision making is consolidated in very few hands. So one person might be reviewing access for too many people, too many applications, and it becomes IAM overload for them. So they're being asked to do all these reviews, and they're often the most busy people in the organization to begin with. So now rubber stamping becomes out of control, especially if you compound it with the first problem. So I guess my question to you is, like, how does SlashID solve this problem? Do you actually solve it, or do you say, like, the approach is wrong and we do something different?
Yeah. So I mean, two of the sort of like most loved features of our platform are actually exactly tackling the first problem that you're talking about, Jim. And it's a very different way to approach it, we think. So one is this sounds very simple and stupid in many ways, but people find a lot of value out of it. We can automatically generate descriptions for roles, identities, credentials, and groups in your environment, so that you're able to see, both as a identity professional, as a security professional, as well as a business user, hey, what can this identity actually do? What does this identity have access to in the environment? And the second thing is, to your point about the complexity of the entitlement systems, often, especially when you look at like cloud environments, it's almost impossible to create a least privilege policy right from the start. So one of the things that we help companies do is observe the behavior of that identity over time, see which entitlements it actually uses, and then automatically generate a least privilege policy that minimizes the amount of access that identity has without disrupting it, which we think is a fundamentally better approach than trying to be prescriptive and trying to create roles or groups upfront, especially in environments that have very complex authorization systems.
That's a great overview. So the other thing that you pointed out was one of the things that really drew you into the industry was the whole data breaches side. So truly security, trying to solve a security problem that all organizations at least need to be thinking about. But you made a statement that most of them are identity related. I think I know what that means, being the co-host of the Identity Center podcast, but I want to know what you mean.
Yeah. So when you look at the various industry reports on data breaches throughout the years, Verizon publishes a very popular one. AWS also publishes a very popular one yearly. Almost all of them across the board mention identity as one of the primary vector for either the initial compromise or lateral movement. I'll give you some stats which I find extremely interesting. 66% of the breaches that Amazon sees in AWS are due to stolen AWS credentials. About 33% of all the breaches that Verizon tracks have a credential-related issue as the entry point. And CrowdStrike tracks in their global reports lateral movement attempts. Most of them are actually identity-related, where somebody's using Kerberos roasting or similar techniques to escalate privileges within an environment. And so it really feels like, from our standpoint, that most of the identity programs out there are not doing enough on the security side, and that's why we're seeing such a spike in identity-related breaches.
Yeah. I read a recent report which pointed out that identity-related breaches have dropped over the past 5 years, and I feel like they're not as persistently in the news. But the guidance in that report, and the guidance that kind of rings true to me, is that even though the number of them may be falling, the impact, the risk is still there, right? The impact outweighs maybe the likelihood, and maybe the likelihood is dropping because of people doing better identity management.
I think what I will say is, if you look at like the latest Verizon report that just came out, I think like today or last night, what you'll see is there is a spike in vulnerabilities as the primary attack vector, as opposed to credential breaches. But credential breaches are still so far the number one cause for breaches. I think what's happening over time is we're moving as an industry away from long-lived access tokens to better ways to authenticate services and machines and so on. But we're still far away from like identity being sort of like a secure part of the IT stack.
Yeah, I mean, look, the problem is not going away. By the way, the report that I was referencing is the RSM U.S. Middle Market Business Index Special Report. And kind of what I thought was the punchline is, even though the data is positive, there was a spike in breaches in 2024, but that the methods being used in these attacks are becoming more sophisticated. Some attacks may go undetected, and that highlights the importance of continuously strengthening security controls. It's that undetected piece, right? That's the real hook.
Yes.
That, people get in the door and then they sit there and then they conduct their attack later after they realize you don't even know that I'm in.
Yeah. No, and honestly, Jim, you're really onto something on this, because when you look at the average, what people in the security industry call dwell time, is the amount of time that an attacker stays in an environment before being found out. For a normal breach, that is 10 days. This is across the board, from like Google reports, CrowdStrike reports, and so on. When you look at identity-based breaches, most of them take over a month to be discovered. And the reason for it is that we just don't have the same degree of detection capabilities that we have compared to endpoint security or cloud security. So I think a big part of what we're seeing, Jim, is that these breaches are harder to detect, and potentially a lot more dangerous. I'll give just one I think key example. Microsoft was under review from CSA because of an identity-related breach where the State Department was compromised. What I think was interesting there was that the way that breach was discovered was through a detection rule for email security that the State Department had internally. It wasn't until then that Microsoft realized that they had lost a key, like a private key, that the attacker was using to sign requests to exfiltrate data. So that really speaks to the complexity of these breaches and the lack of detection capabilities that we currently have.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. That's a great story that you shared. I kind of wonder about that scenario because you hear about it all the time that breaches aren't detected for 170 days, something like that, that kind of dwell time. And I always kind of wonder what drives that from the adversary's perspective. They want to get in, obviously, but why does it take so long for them to be detected? Because I'm assuming the detection really winds up occurring where they detonate whatever the full-blown attack is. So is it like in the meantime they're doing research, or they get in so many doors that they can't conduct the attack on all of them, and they say, all right, we've got a backlog of work here in our hacker project plan, and so 4 months from now we're going to go get that company. In your experience, why are those dwell times so long?
So you have different classes of attackers. You have some attackers that are financially motivated, and then you have attackers that are more politically motivated or have espionage in mind. For the second class of the attackers, maintaining access to the system is by far one of the key statement in their mission. Like, they need to stay in that system once they've compromised. So what they do is everything in their power to stay stealth and under the radar and not trigger any detection. Whereas for financially motivated attackers, they are more interested in sort of like the equivalent of a smash and grab, where like they install ransomware and similar. And for them, what they try to do is find a way to get to kind of like your most sensitive data, and then either exfiltrate that data or use ransomware to force you to pay up or similar. And so in those cases, they care a bit less about detection. And so the detection time frame is a lot shorter. But for espionage and politically motivated attackers, it is part of their MO to stay as stealth as possible, even though that might mean that it'll take them longer to exfiltrate data and whatnot.
Okay, that makes sense. So what does SlashID do, given all those different scenarios? What are the things that you're detecting that, if I'm an IAM practitioner, I'm going to miss today? What is it? What's that special trigger or multiple triggers that SlashID is doing for me that's going to say, okay, now I see why I spend the money and invest in that?
Yes. So we do three things on the detection side. One is we can monitor privileged identities. So you can mark an identity as privileged, and any change done to that identity with respect to creation of credentials, changes in the policies that they have access to, entitlements, access, and so on, we monitor and alert you on them. So you're always aware of whether one of your crown jewels has been used without sort of like a proper reason in place. The second thing is we alert you to any behavioral pattern that we see in an identity that hasn't been seen before. So if all of a sudden we see a service account that is trying to connect to a machine that has never used in the past 90 days or 180 days, you get a detection that you can action on. Either, we'll get to the remediation in a second, but either manually or automatically through our remediations. And then third, we're able to help you detect lifecycle issues. For instance, we're able to detect identities that haven't been off-boarded properly, orphan credentials, roles and groups that haven't been used in a long time. And this helps minimizing the amount of pivot points that an attacker can have when they're trying to move laterally in your environment.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So that's how I detect it. How do I go about remediating it? And I guess there's two concerns I have. So if I'm detecting, okay, somebody's gotten in, somebody's on the network, they have some accounts. How do I trace back? Is this a combination of tools? Is there a role that SlashID plays in this, or trace back what maybe they've done over time? Because I guess there's two scenarios. One is I bring SlashID to, and I look at my current environment, but then there's the going forward of how do I make sure that I detect the breaches quickly so there's not someone sitting on my network for a year. But if I bring in SlashID and I have been breached, but maybe that breach hasn't resulted in the big data exfiltration or ransomware insertion or something like that, maybe the hackers in the process of trying to escalate privileges, things like that. How would I know what they've done? Have they created accounts and things like that? And then what do you think is the process for cleaning up after that?
Yeah. So what we do is we record, but by looking at log data, we record the actions of every identity so that the moment a detection triggers, you're able to look back in time and see everything that led to that to that potential breach and attack. So it's easy both for the identity team and the SOC team to understand what exactly happened in your environment that led to that specific problem. When it comes to remediation, we provide 3 ways to go about remediation. One is remediation playbooks. These are instructions that your IAM analyst or SOC analyst can manually follow to remediate a specific finding, whether this is a posture issue or an active threat. The second option is fully automated. So you can use our APIs to automatically remediate on a detection when it triggers. The advantage of doing that is you stop the attacker on their track immediately. Like you invalidate tokens, access tokens, so they can't move anywhere. You remove all the privilege, all the entitlements from a role, so they can't use the role to do anything in your system and so on. But some companies are concerned about doing full remediation, so we provide a third path, which is the ability to remediate in conjunction with a SOAR tool or manually through our UI, where you can go in, do your investigation, and then decide whether to suspend an identity, rotate a secret, quarantine a role, and so on through our UI or through the SOAR tool that you normally use.
Is there a way to also automate that? So if somebody comes in and detects something to, hey, take predictive action to say temporarily suspend this account until further research is done. Until it's
100%.
suspended. Okay.
Yeah. So what you can do is when a detection triggers, you can have actions like suspend a user or a role or a credential, and then once the investigation is done, you can decide whether to restore that identity or keep it blocked or delete it.
So one more question. So you mentioned logs. So is this something that works in concert if I have a SIM solution on my network, or does it have to replace my SIM solution? So could it work with Splunk, or just throwing that out there, Splunk, or do I have to now send my logs to SlashID?
So we work with your existing SIM, and we can send our detections and alerts to your SIM so that your SOC team doesn't have to use a different UI that they're not used to. And we in general, we try to make sure that whatever tooling you already have, this is true both on the IGA side and the SOC side, we're able to integrate with them so that you're not changing the UI flows that you're used to. And so we can dump all of our findings into your SIM, and then the SOC team can use the SIM to investigate. Similarly, because we expose everything through APIs, if you don't want to, you don't actually have to use our UI at all. You can have your Terraform infrastructure as code, use our APIs to pull information or remediate specific actions.
I mean, to me, this is like ITDR, the vision realized, right? It's all about having visibility to your environment and detecting the threats, but working with your existing infrastructure, but adding the identity intelligence on top of that is that's kind of the approach that you had in mind.
Yes. Yes. What we really try to do is augment your existing tooling. We're not trying to displace your IGA program. We're trying to make it better with that intelligence layer that often is missing.
So if I have all this information, right, I guess I can think about this as from a measurement standpoint. Mm-hmm. All right, I just invested in SlashID. What do your typical customers say is like, okay, this is how we measure the success of the platform? Because it's almost kind of like you hope you don't have to use it, right? But you end up hopefully with data that can kind of come through and say, okay, we're detecting these things, and what do I do from like a response perspective? What have you found is sort of like the key justification that your customers have said, okay, yeah, this is why we bought it?
Yeah. So we find three things that customer mentioned to us. One is reduce time in IGA tasks. This is both in terms of like rollout or of IGA programs, as well as just the time it takes to do access reviews and access requests, thanks to the intelligence layer that we provide. The second is the reduced time in investigation when there is a potential breach, finding who actually created an identity. Was that identity stale? Is this a false positive or a false negative? That saves hundreds of hours for both IAM teams and SOC teams. And then lastly, the ability to use our remediations to avoid all the manual effort that analysts have to do today, where it's either you need to go to the platform team and ask them to write some Terraform to fix identities, or your IAM team has to go in and manually fix stuff, whereas you can use us as a sort of like an abstraction layer to do all the remediation. Ultimately, I think that what this boils down to is, one, it's much easier for you to be compliant and prove to your auditors that you are compliant. And then two, you have the peace of mind that you don't have to spend time building like custom detections in your SOC team to detect identity-based attacks.
That rule set is already built into the product with some sort of standard capabilities. But I imagine as me as a customer, I can add additional policies or rule sets to detect against too, right?
Yeah, and as I mentioned, you can monitor highly privileged identities that are really important to you and might not have sort of like might not have been picked up by our out-of-the-box detections.
How would I go about setting that up? Is it as simple as coming up with like a naming rule or maybe a group membership, or do I go in and flag individual accounts? I'm just trying to think of ways like, all right, in the real world, right? I've got an Active Directory account, and then I have like an Active Directory account .adm, right? And companies tend to follow patterns. Can I do some sort of like pattern matching or group membership analysis to say, okay, anytime an account like this shows up, I don't have to remember to put it into this bucket. It will just automatically go into that bucket.
Yes. So you can do group relationship analysis to automatically tag certain entities. You can also use our APIs as part of sort of like your lifecycle processes to mark specific identities as privileged. And then lastly, we do analysis on our side based on the type of permissions and the type of access that the identity has to, say, PII information and so on, to mark certain identities as high risk, so that you have that full coverage.
Okay, so I'm sold. I'm going to get it, and I want to deploy it. What does it look like to set this up? I guess how long does it take for me to, it's probably an ongoing thing, right? Identities are forever, and there's always something new coming in. But what's a reasonable expectation? So, okay, I've got this thing set up, and now I've got some actionable data to do things with. Is it days, weeks, months? And the curveball in there is, how long do you think is appropriate to detect what I would call, abnormal behavior? Is it based on the account, the person, right? There's always that kind of tuning period, right? It's okay, well, what is normal for Jeff? Well, Jeff's never normal, so he doesn't fit into a bucket, right?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that we do uniquely is we're able to ingest historical data that you already have in your environment. So a lot of companies have data in their SIM, in S3 and so on. We can ingest that data the moment you connect to us. And so you can get behavioral information out of the box immediately within 24 hours from when you connect to the environment. The setup itself takes less than 15 minutes. You give us credentials for your environment, and we provision it automatically. If it's a cloud-based solution, if it's on-prem, you deploy our collector, which is a Docker image, and the collector starts to stream data to us.
Okay, so is this something that you can maybe walk us through and kind of show this how this works?
Yeah, absolutely. I think given that this is a podcast, I'll try to keep this as brief as possible and not particularly and try not to bore people. But basically, once you connect to the environment, this is the typical view you would have for an identity. As you can see here, this is a AWS role. It's an NHI. We tell you automatically you created the role. But I mentioned earlier that we use LLMs to improve kind of like the readability of this data and the visibility. So you can see here that our LLM can automatically generate a description for this role to tell you exactly what the role does and can do in your environment.
So for our people who are listening, I guess I'm looking at like this dashboard, right? And it's essentially pulling in AWS information, and then you're doing things against that, right? You mentioned the LLM and coming up with the probably more human-friendly descriptions of what things happening on, going into this interface and then say, okay, I have a bunch of triggers and configures that I can do, right?
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, if you take sort of like this role here, like the role doesn't tell us that much. It's called AWS Service Role for Amazon Event Bridge API Destinations. That's not like super helpful. Having a human readable description of what this thing can actually do is already quite helpful. As I mentioned, you can suspend this role, delete this role. You can do a bunch of actions on the role. And we discussed a bit about like the ability to help IGA processes when it comes to reducing excessive permissions. You can see here that we can look back in the log data and see which permissions haven't been used by this role in some period of time, whether it's configurable. And then you can ask our LLM to generate a appropriate policy that we actually verify in the environment to make sure that we're not accidentally sort of like removing privileges. So here you see a full-blown AWS policy that is tailored to this role and achieves least privilege based on the past 7 days of data.
It almost seems like functionality from like a KIM system or a CIE, Cloud Infrastructure Entitlement Management.
So the core difference here is that most of the KIM systems try to tell you what entitlements haven't been used, but they don't help you with remediation.
Can you do the same thing from other cloud platforms like Google Cloud as well as Microsoft Azure?
Yes, that's
really
other
powerful.
That's the other big differentiator. We can do it across all the providers that we support. It's not just AWS specific. And so you have the same least privilege capabilities across all the environments.
So you click this button that said get recommendation. And then that's where the LLM is chunking through the data and saying, okay, well, what should we do about that? I guess explain me more what that get recommendation button did on the screen.
Yeah, what that does is it looks at the historical data, it looks at the existing entitlements for that identity. It removes all the entitlements that have not been used in the period of time you selected, which can be 1 day, 7 days, up to like 90 days. And what we then do is verify that policy before showing that to you. Because obviously, as you know, LLMs can hallucinate. And so we want to make sure that the policy is actually well-formed and is not accidentally breaking anything in your environment.
And then basically what you see is like this, essentially like a script, right? Like, here's what we're going to do. And then I take that information, then I can either run it individually, or can I click another button that says, okay, do that? How would you automate that part of it?
So what you can do is to use our APIs to automatically deploy this across your environments.
I mean, one thing that occurs to me is that this gets you a good way toward your least privilege policy. It doesn't get you all the way there, but least privilege is so hard to achieve that if you can at least start to clean up unused roles that you're not even using, that shouldn't exist in the environment, I mean, this takes you a step closer to that.
Yeah, and the way we think about it from a security standpoint is what we're doing here is really reducing the options for an attacker to move laterally in your environment. They might still breach an identity, but then they won't have the same degree of entitlements that they would have otherwise. And so we get you as close as possible to this privilege, while at the same time sort of like being easy to use. It's not as big of a lift as something like IGA.
One thought I had about this is, the lateral movements, absolutely. What I would love to see, so you have my Christmas wish list, would be take this functionality and bring it to the on-prem environment. If we could do this for the on-prem environment, that would be a dream come true.
Yeah. So the good news is that we can already do it for AD. So we support AD as well.
There you go. That's huge.
That's really cool. So I know it's a little bit of a visual demo. So for people who wanted to follow along, we'll have it up on our YouTube channel. Come and check that out. But definitely appreciate you taking the time with us, Vincenzo. I want to ask you a question before we wrap things up. We try to end things on a lighter note. And I don't know how light this will get, but I'm sure you've seen some strange, unique, scary, baffling things maybe over your time with maybe things like Black Hat and so forth. What is the most memorable thing that you've maybe seen as part of that environment, or maybe that culture of attackers and defenders?
Yeah. So there are a lot of like interesting stories that I'm not sure I can talk about, but I'll say one that is dear to my heart because it was part of it. So at the beginning of my career, I started to participate in this competition called Pwn to Own, where you need to demonstrate live exploits against either a mobile phone or browser. And the way this works is you fly to Vancouver, you have this like 2 days competition live, where like you run your exploit against the device, and hopefully it works, and you win. What happened to us one year was the vulnerability got patched literally the night before of the competition. And so we had to stay up like 48 hours straight to find another vulnerability, rewrite the exploit, and try to win. It was a very fun experience for us. But I think it also speaks to sort of like the complexity of like this world, and how hard it is to like keep up with attackers.
Yeah, it's always that cat and mouse game, right? But
yeah,
I good on them for patching it, and then good on you, I guess, as an attacker finding in something else that you could get in through, in a relatively short order. So
yes,
I guess that just highlights, right? The speed for the detection is such an important part of this. Is okay, well, how quickly can we detect something? Right, that dwell time is so important, and it becomes more important as we become more automated and more, let's say, bot and AI driven, where these things are happening, very, very quickly, millisecond speed. And so it can be very difficult to kind of detect all that. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes. I like on that front, one thing that I think flew under the radar a bit too much, but recently the Microsoft research team used an LLM to find vulnerabilities in a bunch of bootloaders. The scary thought is we might be getting to a point where finding vulnerabilities is actually very quick, very fast. And so attackers will have two levers that they can use. On the one hand, it's much easier to phish people because phishing these days has become almost impossible to tell apart. And then on the other hand, the vector that you use to compromise is now much easier to deploy because it's easier to find vulnerabilities. So I think LLMs on the offensive side are somewhat scary just for the increasing pace and making it hard to detect.
Yeah, I mean, gone are the poorly written emails and text messages with second language. Now it's, like I said, very, very difficult to detect, and it's going to happen at some point. So, let the AIs fight each other and then just let me know who wins, sort of at the end. Definitely appreciate taking time with us, Vincenzo. Is there anything that you'd like to get out for people that we haven't covered yet that the people should know about SlashID?
No, I think we covered everything. I will say maybe one last thing, which is Jim mentioned that achieving these privileges is very hard. One of our maybe contrarian beliefs is that achieving these privileges is impossible, which is the reason why you need detection and response capabilities, because you'll never be at a place where everything is perfect, everything is properly segmented from an identity standpoint, and so you need to have the ability to detect and respond to attacks.
I can definitely agree with that. I think, perfection is very difficult to achieve, so you need something to detect this stuff. So I'm on board with that one for sure. So we'll point people to the website slashid.com/IDAC. We'll have that in our show notes, as well as your LinkedIn profile. If people want to reach out, have questions, maybe share a Black Hat war story or two, whatever that might look like. So definitely, again, appreciate you taking time with us. And thanks everybody for watching and or listening. So you can find us on the web, idacpodcast.com. And we'll talk with everyone in the next one.
Thank you both.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com. See you next time on Identity at the Center.